This is part one of what should be a two-part episode. Please note that the tablets talking about his reign are either lost or fragmentary. Kings of the Universe is a fantasy anthology podcast, and therefore may contain material not suitable for all audiences, so listener discretion is advised. Then Uruk was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Agade. In Agade, Sargon, whose father was a gardener, the cup-bearer of Ur-Zababa, became king, the king of Agade, who built Agade. He ruled for 56 years. Episode 3. The First Steps. Zacar paced his chambers, his eyes nervously glancing towards the doorway. It had been months since he sent his cup-bearer to Erewhon. Had Samanthian finally been able to get rid of his incessant cup-bearer? Surely a man with such a formidable host would have little trouble getting rid of one insignificant person. Erewhon does boast one of the world's best phalanx military. Surely just one man would pose no threat. Surely. A cold sweat gripped his nerves when he heard footfalls from the hallway. Hadn't he told that slave boy he didn't want to see him until the morning? Honestly, the way these human slaves work, it was a miracle that anything in his kingdom got done. With his elvish servants, whenever he told them to do something for him, it was done quickly and without question. These humans, however, were weak, dull, and couldn't follow through on a simple order if he had done what he had asked himself. Surely the footsteps were nothing but an overactive imagination. There was no possible way that someone would find a way into his palace without running into his guards, who would make quick work of the interloper. He tried to shake his nerves, but it was all for naught. Perhaps praying to Calimero will help calm my nerves. He made his way to the ziggurat, walking up the sloped steps. His breath was ragged by the time he reached the white temple atop the structure. The high priestess wasn't in the temple, which was a small blessing. He found the carved stone in the center of the temple. The dim light of torches surrounded the statue in shadow. He fell to his knees, looking up at the statue of his patron goddess, his heart filled with lamentation and despair. Calmira, I beg you for your mercy. Whatever aberration you have sent to torment me, please send it away. I implore you. This is too much for a mortal to bear. The statue stood in contemplative silence. The eyes that once held the light of some form of recognition were now dull and listless. Zacar wailed in agony as the disapproval of his goddess and the regret of sending Faralan to his doom overwhelmed him. His fist pounded the stone floor with such anger towards himself, to his paranoia and distrust, that he felt one of the knuckles in his pinky finger crack. The wails echoed through the chamber so loudly that Zacar did not hear the footsteps grow closer until he felt the edge of a cold bronze dagger against his throat. You've finally come to end it, haven't you? His voice was like ice as he turned his head slightly as his would-be assassin. What are you waiting for? Do it! The assassin stood, frozen in a fit of serene fury. As much as I would like to take your life, Calmira demands that I let you live. Zacar scoffed, looking back at his assailant. The fear he had felt that night all those months ago came flooding back into an icy torrent of acid in his veins. Faralan, how are you still alive? I thought that I would be dead and out of your way. Faralan finished form, the bronze dagger glimmering in the torchlight, its incandescent glow making even more light in the room than all of the torches and braziers. I took the tablet to Samanthian as you requested, but Calmira once again warned me of your treachery. The room around him swirled and shifted. Night turned to day, and day to night. People blurred through the temple. The animal sacrifices regained their entrails and lifeblood. Soon they found themselves behind the city walls of Erewhon, a version of Faralan kneeling before King Samanthian. The tablet shattered onto the floor just a few feet from him. You mean to tell me that Zacar sent you here in order for me to kill you, so he couldn't face the wrath of the gods by bloodying his own hands? Faralan nodded slowly, careful not to brush his skin against the tips of the bronze spears placed inches away from his throat. So he would rather that I earn the ire of the gods by doing his own evil deed for him? Samanthian seethed. His usual copper skin now turned red as the anger threatened to choke the voice out of his throat. He took a few calming breaths, his anger replaced with a cold fury. He clutched one of the beads on his necklace, a large, rounded piece of obsidian, no bigger than the size of his palm. What, dear cupbearer, do you think we should do about him? He asked, the beads of his skirt clanking with every step as he descended his throne, until he was towering over the kneeling captive. Once Faralan was confident that the spears were a safer distance away, he stood slowly, careful not to make eye contact with the king towering over him. Calmira herself has declared him an evil and vile man that must be dealt with, but she has made it clear that she does not wish for him to die. If you ask my honest opinion, we need to overthrow him as soon as the campaign season starts. Before he had realized what he had said, it dawned on him that he was now looking at Samanthian directly in his eyes. The king was taken aback, but did not visibly react in a way that alerted his guards. I see now why Zacar is afraid of you. An unexpected smile crept across his face. You have all the makings of a king. You could very easily do what has never been done, not since the gods themselves descended from the heavens, when they made our first ancestors. Unite the whole of the world. Zacar looked around, the scene playing out before him, reducing him to tears that fell freely. Faralan only stood passively, glaring at the pathetic excuse of a king that sat before him. You knew all of this beforehand, didn't you? That's why you tried to kill me. Twice! The disgraced Zacar nodded silently as the world shifted again, forwards this time. Faralan stood in the ranks of the royal guard of Samanthian, a wicker shield at his side and a bronze spear in his hand. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the relative coolness of the winter months. His instructor, a man by the name of Solier, walked down the line of new warriors. His steely gaze looked over each man before stopping at one particularly nervous man. He spoke only one word. You. Before he was on the move again. Faralan felt his heart beat faster as Solier moved closer to his position. Not me, not me, not me, Faralan thought fervently. When it came to using clubs and bows, he was rather good. Exceptional, even. But with lances and shields, he had a lot more room to improve. When Solier stopped in front of Faralan, his heart dropped as he looked up at the imposing man. He was a hulking figure, standing about a hand taller than Faralan, broad shoulders and covered with scars along his chest, belly, and arms. The tight skin holding the man together made Faralan uneasy, at the best of times, but it was the linen covering his left eye that made him more queasy. When the sunlight hit the linen just right, the wrapping would appear translucent, giving the viewer an uninhibited look into the empty eye socket. Let's see what you can do, cupbearer, the man said with a mocking smirk on his face. Faralan suppressed a sigh and squared up with his opponent, Talvin. He had seen him in the court when he had first arrived. He looked just as nervous then as he did now. Solier barked, Fight! And the two wasted no time encircling each other. Tarvalin feigned a jab, but Faralan did not take the deception, instead moving his shield to the right and glancing the bronze spear tip against the tightly woven wood. Faralan capitalized, extending the spear away and pressing forward. He jabbed against Tarvalin's spear over and over again, wood splintering as he pressed his attack. Tarvalin refused to yield, taking each blow in stride before he repeated the same assault against Fairland. By the end, both shields were too damaged to be of use to either man. Each combatant whirled their spear overhead, streaks of orange filling their vision, before Fairland flicked his spear backwards. The butt made contact with Tarvalin's stomach, and he fell, clutching his belly. "Enough!" Solier barked, stepping between the two. "You need more practice, boy," he said to Tolvin, who groaned in response before retching and emptying his stomach. To Fairland, something of a smile came across his face. "Good to know that some of that barbarian blood is making its way through your veins." Vision swirled and settled. Zacar found himself now standing back in the interior of the temple. "So you trained during the winter months, and you think you can usurp my kingship?" Zacar barked a bitter laugh. "I can only imagine the madness that must gnaw in your mind if you think you can usurp me that easily." Fairland smiled. "Did you think that I would be so naive that I would come here alone?" He shouted a word, and 100 armed men flooded the chamber, adorned in shining copper spears and various animal pelts. "Unlike you, I have the hearts of the men I fight with." Zacar braced for a blow that did not come. Instead, a wooden collar was handed to Fairland. "By the divine right of conquest, and with the blessing of Calmira, I, Fairland, claim your kingdom and kingship as my own." As Fairland spoke, Zacar saw a figure lurking in the shadows. He lost the will to resist as the collar closed around his neck. Fairland, along with his troops, led Zacar out of the temple and back to his palace. "In the morning, I will address your people and inform them that your reign is over, and that you have lost favor with the gods." Zacar stood passively as he was escorted to a room. "I have not decided on if I will execute you or not. Until I do, you will stay here as my guest. Under constant watch, of course. After all, it would be in poor taste if my first captive were to run off." Fairland chuckled to himself as he nodded at 2 guards, the copper spears crossing to block any escape attempt. Fairland smiled to himself, walking to the bedchamber that once belonged to Zacar. "Fairland, sir." One of his men spoke rather meekly. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Tolvin. The man looked awkward in his lion skin skirt, and he held the spear at his side like a scorpion crawling on his arm. "If I could speak to you for a moment, in private." Fairland nodded, motioning for Tolvin to follow him. "If you were wondering if I let Samanthian know about our success, I have already sent a runner to inform him about it. That is not what I want to talk about. It's about Zacar. You may have taken his city and his kingship, but you will win over his people if you let him live." Fairland recoiled as if struck. "Why should I grant him mercy? That man has tried to kill me twice. He sent me to a smith who would have done gods know what to me. Crushed my skull with an anvil or a smithing hammer. What if he was especially cruel and tried to throw me into one of the statue's molds and cook me like a roast? Not to mention when he had me arrive at Samanthian's court, he nearly succeeded." Tolvin stood, nodding. He couldn't deny the truth of his words. "I understand your hatred of him, but I promise you that the people will hate you if you put their old king to death." "Then what would you have me do?" "Take over his city and rule it, but keep him alive. Make him your servant. That way, he will have to do exactly what you tell him until the day that he becomes a shade." Fairland hadn't considered that. It would be nice to give him orders for a change. The two stood in silence for an eternity before Fairland finally spoke. I think you might be onto something, Colvin. I believe that his life will be spared by the grace of the gods, and he will work for his atonement. Hello, dear listeners. First of all, I would like to apologize in the delay for getting this episode out. As you can imagine, working on ancient sources that are approximately 5,000 years ago, especially when the tablets are fragmented, can be very frustrating. All of that coupled with my own writer's block, it has been a very difficult episode to get recorded and produced. I will do my best to try to get episodes out on a bi-weekly basis, so whenever this episode drops, give me about 2 weeks and I should have another one ready to go. But yeah, it's been it has been fun. Not particularly. One last thing before I finish up with closing. Looking at my analytics, I would like to give a big thanks and shout out to all of my current listeners, especially to all of you in the US. We are, when I say we, I mean me in general. I now have listeners in Ireland, Spain, and Mexico. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I promise as soon as I start to get back into the swing of things that I will begin to make more content consistently. And I really hope everybody's enjoying this. I have a lot of fun doing this. It's just writer's block is it's not fun. Anyway, Kings of the Universe was written, performed, and edited by Matthew Jordan. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please feel free to email me at at kingsoftheuniversepod@gmail.com. I will also be working on exporting some of these episodes to YouTube, so look for that in the following weeks. Until next time, don't forget to leave a review, follow, and subscribe when the YouTube channel goes live. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next episode.